So, Steve, I'd like to take you back now to February of this year. In particular, in a curry house in Hollywood, we were all around the table, sat drinking cups of tea, and we were reviewing and talking about the USA versus GB event that had happened a couple of days prior. Now, as with most things with Team USA, we move on to the next project, and that was going to be Speedway of Nations in Poland. What I would like to know is what is the link between USA versus GB and Speedway of Nations, and what was the process that was being put into place to get to that event?
Well, of course, the USA GB race was done for many reasons. I mean, firstly, it's quite clear that we were second best by a mile that day, but that's the point. Look at the reality of the situation and give our riders someone new to race against. Because if you look at a typical American meeting right now, calling it for what it is, there's probably about 6 or so first division riders that are just at a different level to the rest. So they're not really going to get that much better by racing each other. But of course, anyone that was in contention for Speedway of Nations this year was in that race in February. And of course, probably the person who loses out the most on this is Max Rummel, because Max was definitely, probably top of the line to be in the frame to get called up. And Max hasn't raced for the USA for a long time. And, it would have been fantastic to have Max have one last attempt or one last night racing for his country. And unfortunately, that's not there to be.
A lot of people would have put Brock Nichols' name into the hat to represent Team USA at Speedway of Nations. At the time, it wasn't made public of Brock's intentions to not ride overseas anymore, but we had that information. We knew. But what I would like to look at is the other riders that make the squad, that make the team. So you have the senior riders such as Luke Becker and Gino Manzarez, but also the youngsters that are coming through the ranks, Alex Martin, Slater Lightcap.
I mean, you're always going to take the ones in Europe as a preference because they're racing that level of competition or thereabouts on those kind of tracks year round. And naturally, Luke picks himself. Brock took himself out of contention, but one thing's for sure is after the Bellevue situation last year, there was zero chance we were going to track the same team again if we were allowed to compete. Brock's been sensational this year. He and Max have been, as expected, the main two domestic riders, but it seems like Brock has the edge right now. Be interesting to see how the AMA National Championship Series plays out, and maybe if the two of those are gunning for each other, it opens the door for someone else to come and swoop under. Slater and Alex are in contention. I mean, Max, of course, has the experience, but Slater and Alex are the future, and you would certainly potentially roll the dice and put one of them in because ultimately there's, if any of the American-based riders struggle, better that a younger rider struggles who's going to naturally have more call-ups and more opportunities in the team as years go by. Of course, neither Slater or Alex matched last year's SGP2 qualifier performances, and I think had either of them made it to the SGP2 final or, kind of been in the 8 points or above level in their qualifier, it would have automatically picked them. And because they didn't, it potentially, gives Max, a chance for a Team USA finale that wasn't, unfortunately.
So let's move on to the finale that wasn't meant to be. So it was a Sunday afternoon. I was at my local track, Birmingham in England, and a text message proceeded into a telephone conversation with yourself, and you relayed the information to me, and I couldn't quite understand what I was hearing. It didn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. What I would like to know is what was the process that you went through? What did people in the higher up of AMA say to you and potentially say to the riders about the decision that they had made?
To be honest, when I got the call, it was in the middle of April. and I was just got a call from Bill Cumbo at AMA, who is probably the best asset from the AMA for American Speedway over the last decade. Wonderful guy, always gone the extra mile, helped us get a little bit of funding each year. Just a treasure of a guy. Just so if you hear about AMA, this and that, you got to get the specifics and know the individuals. And Bill Cumbo is as good as it gets. So he broke the news to me that, that basically it had been decided high up in the organization to remove the team from competition. And it came out of the blue. There was no real warning that this was even on the table. The only thing that preceded it was in a promoter's Zoom call, the first one we've had in 3 years, back in February. It was brought up there about concerns about our, international riders' performances. But when I when I got more information, it was quite clear that individuals in that meeting were not really tracking Brady Landon, Slater Lightcap, Alex Martin, and their performances in qualifiers. In fact, one of the individuals in the meeting said, there's no point people going over for these qualifiers when they don't score any points. And I'm like, what do you mean? So at that point, I just thought that whoever is talking to these individuals higher up in the organization clearly isn't either tracking with what's going on or isn't giving them accurate information. So after that call, I got a very specific document together, put it together for everybody that was in the meeting with all of the facts as to how our performances were in all competitions. And I said, look, if anyone in the organization has concerns, this should put it to rest. But yeah, it was basically it was a shell shock, because ultimately Team USA and Speedway of Nations drives everything we do as a Speedway promotion. It all leads towards this. Of course, a lot of time has passed since then. And look, at the end of the day, Speedway of Nations it's not just about the results on the track. It's about the whole mission. It's about the whole vibe. It's about involving the community. It's probably one of the, out of everything in American Speedway, maybe I'm biased, but this has been, despite its imperfections, and we know it has them, this has been probably the thing that's got people, our public, our riders, our juniors, more excited than anything else. So to have it taken away without any kind of prior consultation was just shocking. I mean, on the other side of the coin, you have to look at, it affects the riders more than me. It hurts the riders, both present and future, more than me, because at the end of the day, I'm an unpaid volunteer on Speedway of Nations. So not having to do this means that I've freed up, several hundred hours of unpaid volunteer time, which goes into it each year, into doing things that, frankly, will be more effective for my own Speedway promotion and other aspects of my life. So if anyone thinks that me losing this team and role is going to be detrimental to what I'm trying to do in Speedway, it's actually quite the opposite. There's more time now to invest into the Bakersfield, Grand Prix track project. But, you can't just, when you've been pushing American Speedway in one direction for like 14 years, and then in one phone call it's taken away without any consultation, it certainly leaves you a bit shocked. And of course, ultimately, the American Motorcyclists Association does own the team. It's their team. It's not my team. They have the right to enter the team or withdraw the team or cancel the team. So everything that they did is within their rights as the federation. But of course, when you're running a sporting team, if the team isn't performing or there's concerns, normally the team owner would speak to the manager and be in regular communication and say, look, we're concerned about this, we're not happy about this. But it's quite clear those conversations didn't happen with me, and they happened with whoever else was involved in this process. And look, if there's a new project that's coming alive because of this, which is going to be great for American Speedway that they can't tell us about yet, I have no problem with that. I'll support it. I'll swallow my disappointment and get my shoulder behind supporting whoever. But of course, we just want to make sure that there isn't any, individual who, based off of their own vested interest or their own personal situation or their own perceived, if they perceive that guys going overseas is detrimental to their racetrack, thus they want to get rid of the project. That's where it becomes an ethical lapse. Where it's like you can't sabotage one of the best things in American Speedway because it doesn't fit your business agenda. You got to embrace it.
You spoke there of a European Grand Prix-style track coming to Bakersfield. Now, some people may have seen the teases that have gone out on the various American Speedway Facebook groups on social media of different tracks imposed onto a Google Earth image of Bakersfield. Can you say any more of these potential plans?
Well, we found out about 9 months ago. The owners of Kern were owners of Irwindale Speedway, which was basically a half-mile paved stock car track and a drag strip, as the Americans say, and hugely successful racetrack, and by far the most successful, private short track of any motorsport venue in California. And of course, Tim and Lisa Huddleston knew that venue was going away because they leased the property. The property had been sold for redevelopment a decade ago, and it was always going away. So they bought Kern. They own the property at Kern, and they're car people. So part of the vision for Kern is to have partners that specialize in other forms of motorsport. So we were already at Kern with the previous ownership. And one thing that Tim Huddleston had seen when he came to our events was he thought our racetrack and the events and the racing was fantastic. But he felt that the spectator experience was extremely compromised because, the main grandstands are, there's catch fencing, there's a stock car track, and you're just too far away to really be on top of the action like you are at Costa Mesa or City of Industry. So, and of course, the other thing too is he's partnered up with a dirt track stock car promoter. So they're now using the track outside of ours way more than before. And I think the vision for Kern is to have a facility that has multiple racing events going on, several nights a week, sometimes 2 events on the same night, and just really make it the motorsports Disneyland of California. So Tim told me about the project towards the end of last year about relocating the Speedway track. And at that point, we brought up the fact, well, if we're relocating it, it would make sense with what we're doing on the international program to have the track to be to European size and specifications. I mean, it would open the door to having FIM World Championship or World Championship qualifying events at Bakersfield, though trust me, that is so far into the future and, such a big project in itself. That's a subject for some other time that may or may not happen. And of course, with our vision for Team USA and with our need to make our team more competitive, having a European-sized track in our backyard is there as a quantum leap to make the riders ready for the team. And of course, when the team was suddenly taken away with no, just with no prediction, it did cross my mind about, well, do we just, not do the big track and just do a small track and, and just kind of, run Speedway, maybe like other promoters where you're running it as a business that you're just looking at, just looking at making it a profitable business, and it needs to be a profitable business. But having had time to kind of reflect and plan ahead and regroup, we still want to go ahead with the big track. And, ultimately, if Team USA ever comes back, whoever is going to be in charge of Team USA is going to benefit dramatically from our program. And look, it's not like we never thought Team USA was a forever project. If anything, being involved with it for 13 to 14 years is a much longer run than most anyone has in the modern day involved in a sports team. So it was clearly the baton was going to be passed along at some point. Naturally, the way it played out was probably not cool, and it would have been much better to have a more, transparent and more, open and more better communication in the passing of the torch, because we'd have always been receptive to any positive change for the sport, even if our circumstances changed. But having a big track, I mean, I think, when we come to bringing overseas riders and international events, they're going to be a whole another level, because if you watch a Grand Prix, you see the level of racing that a big track can bring. You watch British League racing, you see the level of racing that it can bring. And that's what we bring into America. Ultimately, we could have just decided to make it a City of Industry or Costa Mesa type track, but there's already a City of Industry and Costa Mesa type track. And, they're good tracks on good venues, but we don't really want to copy what they're doing. We think that our program is, and our passion and our vision for the sport is quite different to anyone else's, and we want to keep that going. Ultimately, we've lost one day of racing a year with Speedway of Nations. We want to, make an impact on the other 364, and that's what's happening with our new track.
So with having a European style track based at Bakersfield, do you feel that the riders who are going over to race in Europe, that spending time on that style of track would help the riders learn and just prepare them a little bit more at home before they take the trip across the pond over to Europe, to either whether it to be league racing or individual FIM events? We had World Ambition Day a few weeks back now, where we had Brady Landon, Alex Martin, Timmy Dion, Slater Lightcap, Nick Holbein, all racing over a weekend all together in various different parts of Europe. And having had that time over in the States to prepare, do you feel that possibly it would have aided their performances?
Yeah, great points there. I mean, basically, here's the thing. You got riders like Alex and Slater. This year, they spent extensive time in Europe ahead of their qualifiers just to go out and practice and get prepared for their race. So did Nick and Brady. Now, these guys are extremely fortunate because you've got Greg Hancock, who spends a lot of time in Europe with his many, many projects. Unbelievable what he gets done. And he makes himself available to work with all of them, because naturally, if you're spending time with Greg, it's going to make you a much better rider by miles. So any moment of Greg's time that anyone can get on any side of the pond is pretty vital. But of course, imagine you don't have to travel all the way to Poland to get big track experience. So, it's quite clear that having this European-sized track here, it's not going to make American riders worse. It's going to make them better. And not just the guys currently at the top, but riders of all ages. If they are ever going to go and race in qualifiers, they need to be more acclimatized on a bigger track. So, the Speedway of Nations, it was the showpiece of what we're doing, and it was the goal and the ambition of where these guys want to get. So now the work we've been doing ourselves with the younger generation of riders, we've been working with these under 21 guys. We also have the Junior Academy, and then we have the USA GB event. These are all part of the same big picture. So Alex and Slater, they go and spend 2 weeks in Europe. They ride a bunch of Polish tracks, and they come back better riders. So imagine what's going to happen to the sport where that's accessible for everybody, rather than spending thousands and traveling on an 11-hour flight to Poland. It's a 2-hour drive away in Bakersfield, 365 days a year. That's what we've got in store for American Speedway with that. So even though we're probably not going to be involved with running the national team in World Championship competitions, our real mission and project hasn't gone away. In fact, it's probably strengthened our purpose more than ever. We're just not the kind of people to sit back, take a hit, hold up the white flag and quit and give up and become apathetic just because there was a decision made in a position that we could do nothing about. Speedway's changing all the time. And, there's other people that could run the international program, and down the line, they probably will. But this project is something that will complement that and whoever's doing it down the line. So, our plan is to have this to be the catalyst for moving American Speedway forward. And it's something for everybody. It should benefit every rider, every track, every coach, and every project. It's not a closed project. It's something that's there for the sport. So we're not going to sit back and let that fall apart just because we got a sudden setback.
What is the vision of Speedway in Bakersfield with the new track?
Well, Andy, thanks for asking that. The vision with Bakersfield for the new track is we certainly, it's fair to say that since the track changed ownership, which is about 2 years ago, the owners have, first of all, their priorities were in completing their tenancy at Irwindale. And, the Huddlestones, they go large, they think big. So Irwindale's been gone now since December. They have Kern, and Kern, has the asphalt track and has the sprint car track and has the speedway track, and it's going to have a drag strip in the future. And, it has not just the racing, but it has things like car shows and things like that. The facility is being used and will be used more. And they also have the Famosa drag strip in Bakersfield, the historic Famosa drag strip. They run stock cars at Roseville, and they have a touring car series. So there's plenty of stuff that they do. But of course, the thing with speedways, it's fair to say that some of our events, we've been putting on some great events, and we've been, one big positive in the last 6 to 12 months is the flat track program has been growing. That's getting huge. But of course, speedway wise, until we're in the new track, we're not really going to unleash our marketing power. And the Huddlestones, they know how to market, they know how to promote events, but they're not going to put all of their marketing expertise into a racetrack where the spectator experience is inhibited because you're too far away from the track. And the position of the track right now is deliberately being put right next to the sprint car track because, for example, our ticket booth and our modern bathrooms can be used by either track. We're going to be that close that, you don't need to use Portaloos. You're going to have, modern, clean bathrooms right there on a ticket booth. So, if you've seen our speedway races, it's fair to say that the grandstands are pretty sparse. And we've been running these double headers with flat track, but really, and we haven't been doing an AMA national round this year. And part of it is we're not going to promote, unleash the marketing power on getting a new fan base into our track until we have an experience that it doesn't just give them amazing racing on the racetrack, which we do every event, but it's also going to give like the highest possible spectator experience where every fan that leaves the track is asking, when is this happening again? I'm coming back, because they're on top of the action and they're on top of fast action on a fast European sized track. So, we've had to adapt and work with our landlord's priorities, but this new track that was their idea shows the investment and belief that they have in Speedway. And trust me, they wouldn't be investing and we wouldn't be investing what we are on this track. It was going to be a track where no one shows up to watch. So, 2026 is going to be very exciting.
So this leads us to the future. What is the plan of Team USA going forward?
Well, Team USA was never about me, or was never the Steve Evans show. If it ever came across like that, that was never, ever the intention. The whole thing from day one was to really do something for our riders, give them the best opportunity. Guess it gets into a bit of a controversial subject because I've had other promoters, they've raised objections and concerns with me about riders going overseas. I've even been told to stop pushing riders from going overseas because it's ruining American Speedway. My answer to that's always been the same. Not any promoter, me included, has the right to set career goals for any Speedway riders. I don't think a single rider that's gone to Europe has gone because I magically told them about European Speedway or made them go. It's like, we've never heard of European Speedway before, Steve. Thanks for making us go. They know about it because they watch the Grand Prix. They watch league racing on British Speedway Network. They used to watch Greg and be inspired by him. We all were. We still are. You know, obviously we don't have an American in the Grand Prix series now, but Luke definitely inspires people with his performances, particularly Speedway of Nations, where he's always stepped it up to another level. Um, Gino at the ground level is inspiring people in Sweden with this is the hard work that it takes to establish yourself in Europe. So anyone that's watching overseas racing and following riders is going to get inspired. And it's not my job to tell people that they're not allowed to have ambitions to make it on the world stage, that they have to stay in America. I know I've always felt that actually a few guys going to Europe that have ambitions is more beneficial for American Speedway because it's a thing to inspire the masses, but clearly not all of them are going to make that level, and that's where our local rider base comes from. You know, one of the most ridiculous things I've been told is that guys like Gino and Luke going overseas is why we don't have enough riders in America. That's only two riders. And if you look back at events from 5 or 10 years ago and see all of the domestic riders that have stopped racing, you can see where the problem is. I mean, it's up to the promoters really to work together and find out why so many of our domestic riders have quit, and to work together and see if we can address those reasons and make American Speedway more appealing for people to stick with. And look, you're never going to have 100% rider retention. People come, people go. Some come back, some don't. But I think we're just losing way more riders than what we're gaining now, and that's part of the problem. So we certainly want to, take a look at the sport and fix the sport and fix American Speedway. We can't just sit and pretend it's perfect. We can acknowledge what's good, but we have to go in and address the problems with the domestic program that the domestic program might be causing itself. So anyway, it's unfortunate. I mean, and again, when it comes to the American team and Speedway of Nations, we felt it was a good inspiration. And it was something that honestly we could have kept going without any time, attention, or resource from American Motorcyclists Association. Anyway, I've tried to bring the promoters together. I've tried to talk and say, why don't we address these matters? So far, I've been unsuccessful. It hasn't been embraced. I'm not sure if it's me that's the problem, but I feel I've done what I can to make things better, get us all on the same page. I mean, take the AMA National Championship Series. That's a key thing with this. It's good that industry has stepped up to stage 2 rounds to make it still 3 rounds, but it's gone down to 2 tracks. And, with a track that jumped ship, I suppose, but just to clarify that matter, we never actually committed to the series this year. We were quite clear back in February that we weren't going to be involved in running the series. We would like to come back, but aside from our own circumstances, there's things within the series and its own organization that needs to be addressed. There were aspects of staging our round last year that were frankly painful on the organizational side, and they didn't have to be that way. With better organization on the series, it could have been avoided. Naturally, this year is a different year for us. We can see now with the new track, we are in a transitional stage, and we would like to come back to the series, but we're not just going to jump in without some structural changes and improvements that make it a better and smoother and more kind of organized experience for staging promoters. Right now, the series, in recent years has been 3 promoters each staging individual events, whereas now it's 2 promoters staging excellent individual events. The events themselves are great, but it's the series itself as an entity that needs more direction, more organization. So it's a good representation of American Speedway to people outside.
The one thing that you can say about Steve, absolutely, is he's very passionate about what he does, whether it be in his work profession or anything to do with Speedway. I've known Steve for over a year now, and I met Steve firstly on over a Zoom call, and that was the first thing that got me about Steve was his passion for not just Team USA but the sport in general. This then heads quite nicely to talk about the AMA and what is your feelings towards the AMA, Steve? I did see that there was a bit of storm brewing over a recent poll that was put out on a Facebook group about asking people about their opinions of the AMA. I'd just like to get your take on it, your feelings towards the AMA after they have dissolved the country's national team.
That's a really interesting question. I mean, the American Motorcyclists Association, I was lucky enough to be on site there in 2013. We had FIM training there for team personnel. And it's amazing how few people work there. So, it's not exactly, it's not a skyscraper. It's a small organization with a small number of staff that have a lot of things to take care of. Regarding the Speedway of Nations matter, they made a decision and it was within their right to make the decision. They are the owners and the custodian of the team. But I think it's fair to say that the communication, mainly to the riders and the public, wasn't great because there still hasn't been any public statement about it. The communication to me as the outgoing team manager, just like in any sport, they don't have to tell me anything than thank you for your services, which they did. Of course, my situation's a little different because, I'm still a promoter and a lot of my projects and events are very much in the heart and soul of the AMA program. I don't have any kind of lingering upset. Things always happen that we don't agree with. We have to get over them and get past them. And it's fair to say that, there was a poll I made that got completely taken the wrong way by a fellow promoter. It is what it is. He's a good guy. He runs a fantastic race operation. But it was put out that my poll about people's public perception of the AMA was there to, I think in his words, to stir shit up, which the actual intention was to get an assessment of how people felt about the American Motorcyclists Association and bring that in to a promoters meeting and kind of do our work as AMA promoters to improve the public's perception. The response the promoter gave and filling in a lot of blanks on AMA was frankly brilliant. He put some really good stuff on it, but it begs the question, firstly, this should have been made known in the first place rather than my poll creating an objection. And secondly, well, if AMA isn't steering the ship, then who is? Particularly when it comes to what happened with Speedway of Nations. And these are some of the mysteries. But my viewpoint is if the AMA has a bad reputation, it's really more of an endorsement of the promoters that run AMA programs. And, my fellow promoters, they're busy. They have to put their own business first. That's understandable. But I've tried more than once to plant some seeds and get some discussion of things that I think will benefit all of us and the sport. And so far, unfortunately, I've kind of failed miserably at getting traction on that, which maybe it's down to me. But, our plan is to, continue our business as normal. And that includes a lot of, some of our showpiece events are sanctioned events and they help what we do. And they also help the American Motorcyclists Association and most importantly, Speedway as a whole. So we're not planning to take anything away. I mean, naturally, we also have to see what is actually happening. We're still a bit in the dark about some of the future directions, but as long as the future directions are for the good of the sport and, and enhance rather than inhibit individual promotions and aren't like leaning towards just one promoter and, rather than for the good of all, then why wouldn't we sanction with them? But also I think we need to reach out to the promoters that, in times gone by have decided to just run independently and find out newly what would it take to get everybody on the same page. And that's going to be the awkward discussions which should be had. And hopefully, some of the promoters that are a bit disaffected regarding working with AMA could potentially be salvaged because, a democratic, fair organization that is not just benefiting one or two promoters, but benefiting everybody with a bit of give and take from all of us is naturally the direction that Speedway should go. I've always said that between Brad Oxley, Jason in New York, Kelly, Dave Joyner, they each have some brilliant specialties, absolutely brilliant specialties. So if all of those are used for the greater good of the sport, give Kelly the project for what he's best at, give Brad the one from what he's best at. Maybe I'm good at something. Then how could the sport not do better? I'm not a fan of committees that just don't have assigned roles because they tend to just slow things down. I think it's more of an organization. Okay, someone's in charge of the rule book, but that person is making positive changes to the rule book, not just making no changes. Someone's in charge of marketing and someone's in charge of the national series. And if everyone takes on a project and they report to each other and they do it for the greater good, then what's the problem there? There isn't. It's brilliant. It would take American Speedway to another level. I don't think that Steve Evans or Kelly Inman or Dave Joyner or anyone else is the magic single-handed visionary to change the sport. I think it takes taking the best of all of us and trying to get on the same page. And we can disagree. I disagreed with Kelly's assessment of my motives for the poll because they were incorrect because I know what my motives were. But, do I still talk to Kelly? Absolutely. I'm not gonna just, throw a tantrum over that. I'm gonna respectfully disagree with him on that, but certainly respect plenty else about what he does because he's a good guy who does a lot of good stuff, and so is everybody else. And of course, just to clarify regarding my fellow promoters, I think they all have amazing skills. I think there's things that each of them can do that I can't do. I mean, Kelly is quite magnificent. He exudes enthusiasm, and he has a track where people love to race. Same with Costa Mesa. Costa Mesa, Brad is doing everything in his power under very difficult circumstances to keep his family legacy going and does a great job, does amazing events. Jason's pioneering single-handedly a whole state with New York. And of course, and Dave at Fast Fridays, you've got this racetrack that the whole town is behind. You go to Auburn and it's cool if you ever travel up there to just spend a day in the town and just look at the presence of Speedway. It's true that the presence is at the racetrack, but you go into a restaurant and there's Speedway photos on the wall. I don't think there's anywhere else on planet Earth that does that. So, sometimes we get grumpy at each other. Sometimes we drive each other crazy. Sometimes we don't, we're not each other's greatest fan on a particular day. But, if it wasn't for the five of us, there wouldn't be any Speedway. So I can give them a hard time. And at some point I probably will again. But, they each have unique abilities. And I'm glad every one of them is doing what they do. Of course, regarding AMA, one thing we have to be careful of is I remember back in 2010, promoters, myself, Brad Oxley, Sean McConnell, who was at San Bernardino at that point, and Jeff Mediato, who was that time the promoter of industry, we all got invited to an AMA meeting. AMA had this organization called Speedway USA. There was another promoter who was the chairman of the board, but it got to a point where he ended up being the only AMA promoter, in the country. So he was in charge of this organization, but there wasn't really much to be in charge of when the only track was him. So, of course, we need to make sure that in any structure or restructuring of AMA, that there needs to be a balance of power. And, I think if any one promoter has misbalance of power and they're putting their track first, it isn't a good situation. And then you're going to, it's all very well having a kingdom, but if the only person in the kingdom is yourself and one other person, it really isn't much of a fruitful direction, because then the majority of promoters are running independently, and I hope it doesn't come to that.
Do you feel that, just returning back to Team USA now, that the recent performances of the team over the last year or so have added to the decision to dissolve the team by the AMA?
Andy, that's a great question about the USA's current ranking of 12th place. Now, interestingly enough, if you just look at the results of last year's competition and you look at the world ranking, it doesn't look great. I agree with that. But of course, you've got to just look beyond the scores and know the story. After last year's Speedway of Nations, the day after, we were inundated with messages from young riders and junior parents about how inspired they were, particularly the fact that Luke Becker was there beating Grand Prix riders with ease, really showing his world class. And I think even though Brock and Gino struggled, I think the riders in America, seeing them struggling, that are used to seeing them winning in American meetings, it gave them a taste of reality of how difficult the job is at hand, where you can be a very accomplished rider, and if it's not your night, you're not going to do well. So yeah, 12th as a world ranking is not great, but last year with all of its troubles in basically in about an hour and 15 minutes worth of crammed in racing, that's what we had. There was still plenty of positives and inspired kids watching the team with its ups and downs. And ultimately, this year, I think we're not in the competition. There's 15 countries in the competition. So I guess we're tied for 16th place in the world with about 190 other countries, some of them that don't do Speedway. Our world ranking for 2026 is going to be the same as Mozambique and Tanzania and Afghanistan. We're going to be tied for 16th place in the world with every other country that didn't enter the competition. And sports teams have ups and downs. And I think, Manchester United, one of the most famous football teams or soccer teams in England, had a terrible season last year. So what do? They didn't get taken out of competition. They just regroup, rebuild, and come back. And of course, the truth is that 2025, Speedway of Nations, if our team didn't improve, then with next year being a World Cup year with only 9 nations, would have been sat down in 2026 anyway. And that would be a great time to review everything, including what we want to do. Or is it time to pass the reins over to somebody else? So, but of course, in 2027, you got the likes of Slater and Alex 2 years from now. Maybe they'll be on European teams. You got Nick Holbein, who, whether others like it or not, he's made a decision. He's going to race in Europe. We can't tell him not to. And of course, Brady Landon, the great Hope, the current SGP4 world champion. All of these guys are going to be in the frame. So, it seems short-sighted to stop the team for 1 year. And even if there's a bigger and better vision that somebody has, and if there is, we're freaking behind it 100%. But if there's a bigger and better vision, then we could have just finished out our tenure, taken the team to competition this year without any, expense or time or attention on anyone else. Maybe prove the doubters wrong, or maybe prove the doubters right, and it just clarifies it's time to take a new direction. That would have been preferable, but again, it's not my decision, and the decision was made by the organization, which is granted the right to make that decision.
Everybody would have seen the social media posts that have been going out from Team USA, that it's now included a hashtag, which is the show must go on. Steve, what does that mean to you and to the project and to everybody else that is involved with Team USA?
As I said, when the initial news came out of the blue that there wasn't a team anymore, it was a shell shock. You're just stunned, well, where do we go? But you have a lot of time to think about this and regroup with your friends and partners and sponsors and allies and teammates. And became quite apparent that even though Speedway of Nations was the thing we're pushing, and this was our kind of big project and our big deal, that the project itself and the purpose was much bigger than that. And it was never about one event. It was about a whole mission and crusade. And having that one event taken away from us without our consent, it did change things. It did mean we had to reorganize things, but it didn't kill the purpose, because the purpose was American Speedway. The purpose was making the sport better. The purpose was giving riders the opportunity to have a career in the sport on either side of the pond. So, the show must go on, because someone's decision that was their right and their decision, but we don't agree with and still have lots of questions about it. It doesn't end a mission and a vision. So that continues and always will.
Steve, thank you for your time.